Hey, Durham Church. Kiat and Floyd, welcome. Joe, good to see you again after a while. Bob, yay. Hello. What a Sunday. This is awesome. This is awesome. It's also Dana Stone's last Sunday before she moves to Raleigh. And Raleigh is not that far, but Dana has been talking about it like she's moving to France. You know though, Dana, if you step outside and look that way, that's basically Raleigh. Durham and Raleigh kind of bump up against each other. Do y'all ever talk to people from out of town who say you're from Raleigh, Durham? That's my favorite. I'm like, that's not a town. That's two towns. Raleigh, Durham is an airport. Nobody lives there. So Dana requested a song for her last Sunday, and as Amanda Mariner would say, it's bad juju to deny a song request when somebody is moving as far away as Raleigh, especially. This is just my way of, getting it in your head that it's okay. The song is Love's in Need of Love Today by Stevie Wonder. That's the request. It's not in the hymnal, but it should be. It really should be. It's a great song. It's the opening track on the Songs in the Key of Life double album that it was all I listened to for 3 months once, just over and over again. It's great. Learning about the song as we were trying to get ready to sing it, it was fascinating to read about what goes on in Stevie Wonder's head, what he was thinking about. And he said with this one, the idea that he had was that for love to be effective, he says it has to be fed. Otherwise, he said, love by itself is hollow. I think what he's saying is that often what passes for love might need an infusion of a deeper, truer love. Otherwise, it might just be noise. It might be like the gongs and the clanging cymbals of 1 Corinthians 13. So he wrote this song, Love's in Need of Love Today. Stevie said that he just plays. He just sits down at the piano and plays and songs happen. Pretty incredible. He describes himself like a painter, somebody, he says he gets inspiration from experience that can be painful or beautiful. He said, I always start from a feeling of profound gratitude. Only by the grace of God am I here, and I write from there. He always starts to write from a place of profound gratitude. And he said God gave him this song as something to deliver. He said the song that Dana picked is a sermon. Now, before moving on, when Stevie sits down and songs just come fully formed out of his genius mind, he's just being Stevie. We can't all be Stevie. I know, because I've been trying all week. But think about this. Before this song ever happened, he was walking around thinking about love. He was taking all of his experiences of pain and beauty and gratitude, and he used all of that and all of his gifts to speak a word for people. Started with the feeling of gratitude, and then he began. Can we do that? Absolutely. There's nothing about what Stevie Wonder does when he writes and when he lives that we can't do. Beautiful things come out of what he does. Beautiful things come out of what we do. I really was struck by this. Whenever he started something, he leads with gratitude. And once he settles himself in the grace of God and God's mercy, then he writes. Then it comes out. We can all do that with our pain. and with the beautiful things that happen and with the gifts that we have. So, Stevie says, love's in need of love today. So, where does love get the love that it doesn't have to have more of if it starts as love? You see what I'm saying? What love's in need of love today? How are you going to replenish it with what it is? It's a great question. And here's one answer. John 15. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in the Father's love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I don't call you servants any longer because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends because I have told you. I've told you everything that the Father has told me. I've made it known to you, everything I've heard. Then Jesus says, you didn't choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you love one another. The source of the infusion of real love, where our tepid and timid love, where the love that maybe rings a little false, the real thing, the real love, starts with the Father's love for Jesus. He says, as the Father has loved me, and we know the Father loves Jesus because at his baptism, the sky split, a dove came down, and he said, this is my child. I love him so much. Listen to him. Transfiguration, same thing. This is my child. I love him. Listen. So how do we get in on that? How do we get in on that Father love that the Father has for Jesus? Well, in one sense, there's absolutely nothing we can do. Jesus says, you've been chosen. You didn't choose me. Jesus said, I chose you. And he says, very plainly, as my Father has loved me, so I have loved you. And then he says, abide in the love. So what else is there to do but abide? Live in that love that chose us before we chose it. Let that be home. Get your mail at that place where God's love has found you. That's one way. But on the other hand, Jesus says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Now, there's some big, scary ifs in this thing. Stuff that seems kind of conditional. And it only gets scarier because after Jesus says that, he says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I've loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. This talk Jesus was given was happening the night before he was killed, the day before he was killed. This was the last moment he had with them. So they know what's coming. He's been telegraphing it. They know it's here. And so when he ties this commandment to love one another and laying down lives for friends, they're going to be getting the message that this is real. Now, in one way, it might not have been that scary for them because this idea that you lay down your life for your friend, that was actually a common idea in the culture. Aristotle, Plato, all those guys said the height of friendship is to be willing to die for your friend. There's one storyteller, Greek storyteller, who tells his readers that they will read in his book many deeds of blood and battles and deaths for the sake of friends. That wouldn't have been a new thought to them, what Jesus said, that there's no greater love than to lay down your life for your friend. The difference is that Jesus did it. I mean, he was on his way to doing it, laying down his life for the sake of his friends. And so in this moment, everything is getting all wrapped up. They're bringing in things from the culture, cultural understandings, but it's being connected to Jesus' history and his body and his friends. It's interesting that Jesus says, this is my commandment, that you would love one another. Jesus doesn't usually talk like that. When I read that this time, because I'm not sure I've ever noticed it before. That happens a lot. You think you've read something, you preached on it a bunch, and then you see a word, and you're like, when did they put that word in there? My commandment. What about the greatest commandment? They asked Jesus what's the greatest commandment, and he says, love. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we'll pray for him in the prayer time. The difference between when Jesus says the greatest commandments, as Weston said, love your neighbors, love yourself, love God with your whole heart. The difference when Jesus says, my commandment is love one another as I've loved you, is it comes with the expectation that loving one another, following the commandments, has to do with joining Christ in his death, in the way that we live. It's his commandment because he's connecting it to the cross. So the laying down your life for your friends with Jesus' commandments is not a maybe, it's a will. It is an absolutely. That's what that means. So Jesus' death and obedience is bound up with ours. I read somebody studying this passage who said, this may be the most radical words of the gospel because it claims that the love that enabled Jesus to lay down his life for his friends is not unique to him. It can be replicated over and over by every single one of his followers when we enact that love in our lives. So, therefore, the Christian vocation is to give freely in that same way, to love freely and generously without counting the cost, without wondering and worrying about getting something back. It's a command to a daily kind of dying. You know, usually when we read lay down your life for your friend, it sounds like a kind of one and done deal, which would be easy. It would be like the movies, you know, the Westerns, where they're like, they know they're going to die. Game of Thrones, this happens a few times, and they're like, make it quick. You know, I don't want to suffer, make it quick. That's not the kind of Christian death. The kind of Christian death that we're called to is the daily dying to ourselves in service to other people. Now, Jesus does this sometimes. He says one thing and you think you know where it's going. Then he kind of changes course. He does that here. After putting the ifs in there, like if you keep the command, then he says, I don't call you servants any longer because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing, but I've called you friends because I've made known to you everything that I've heard from my Father. Okay, so now the conditional bit isn't there, and we're friends because Jesus has told us everything. Jesus has revealed everything that the Father revealed to Jesus. This is another thing that was just in the culture, something that they valued. So they saw friendship as the ultimate expression of friendship, as being willing to die for your friends. The other thing that marked real friendship was frank and full speech and disclosure. Frankness of speech is the language of friendship, somebody said about 2,000 years ago. The lack of frankness is unfriendly and ignoble. To be a friend back then was to speak frankly and honestly and not to hold back. And people would warn their kids, you'll know who your friend is, whether they're honest and open or whether they use words to get something. We kind of see that in Paul's letters. Remember when Paul's always like, don't trust the fancy talkers all the time. And he showed up and preached Christ crucified. He spoke directly and frankly, full disclosure. And this is what we see Jesus doing here. Jesus says, you're my friend, not because of anything you did, but because I have chosen to tell you everything. What the Father's told me, I pass on to you. In his words, also his life. I think this is pretty neat that you take these two ancient understandings of friendship and then you see them in the gospel, but instead of just being moral advice or kind of an accepted cultural understanding of friendship, John's gospel, Jesus in here is using these things to draw us into the life of God and explain what it's like. Using friendship. Drawn into the life of God, when the love from the Father to Jesus, from Jesus to us. And then he says, bear fruit. I think this was a temptation then and now, that if you're tapped into some spiritual power, that's as good as it can get. You can have your internal experience, and Jesus looks at that and he says, no. Bear fruit. Work. Fruit that will last. He says, that's why I tell you to love one another so that you can bear the fruit. For most of us, our death in Christ will not be a quick death. But it doesn't mean that we can put it off. It's easy to put it off. But what we've been offered is friendship with God, friendship with one another, that is held together by the love of the Father, marked by sacrifice and straight talk and openness and vulnerability. I saw something at a gas station this week that made me think of this, about the way we speak to each other and see each other. There was a woman over to the right, and she looked a little rough, but she looked like she was trying really, really hard to keep it together. And the woman behind the counter knew her. And at one point, she looked right at her and she said, "You look good." And then the woman standing there had to fight back tears. And her whole demeanor changed, and she kind of brightened up. And then on the way out, she told the woman that her daughter had just been baptized on her birthday. And then I saw her walk off with this guy and a dog. I think they're homeless. That moment, though, when the woman at the store just looked at her and said, "You look good," seeing something that she couldn't see and being there. And then the baptism, that threw me off. The baby on the birthday having the baptism. I mean, that's when the dying really begins. When we die with Christ in baptism. That's why my buddy Amy Lara always says, what are you so worried about? You're dead already. Live like you're dead. Lay down your life. It's always the daily stuff. It's always the interruptions. It's always the things that you don't always want to do. Those are the moments when we pray that the Spirit would bring the words back to us. There's no greater love than this, to lay down your life for your friend. And Jesus tells us right in there, he's saying all this so we would have joy. But here's the thing, and we all know this. We don't have to just take Jesus on his word with this. We know that joy is the outcome of laying down our life for our friends. It's like Sabbath and exercise and the whole long list of things that are wonderful and make us feel better that we don't do. But it always works. It's what it is to be human in the way of Jesus. John Calvin said, that's usually just never a good thing to hear in a sermon, but the love of the Father towards the Son, and of the Son towards us, and of us toward God and our neighbor, are joined together with an inseparable knot. And there is nothing sweeter, and there is nothing more pleasant. Somebody else said, where there is no love, put love, and you'll find love. The only love that we have to put anywhere is the love that went from the Father to the Son, to those the Son chooses to draw into the life of God. That's what we've got to put in, to bring the love that is needed, what the world needs. What would Stevie do? That's what I've been asking myself this week. I was really moved by this. Walking around thinking about love and pain and beauty and gratitude. And then he sits down and he does his thing. You know, I don't know where you can find this, but I saw it a long time ago. It's a list of every album that Stevie Wonder plays on per year. And you'd think, if somebody said, how many would you guess? I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6, with the big bands and all that. No, it's a list about this long, and I've only heard of like 2 or 3 of the bands. Apparently, if you ask Stevie Wonder to play with you, he will. Yeah, let's ask, right? Yeah. Yeah, laying down his life. So he said, Stevie Wonder said the song was a sermon. And so now we're all, well, not all of us, but about half of us are going to preach the song. We're going to play it for you, Dana, and sing it. Our mega choir is down a few people, but it's still, like, we're still breaking records with this choir. The birth of a tribute band is what this is. Y'all ready? You are? Just kidding. Okay.